What's up, 5th and 7th hour? This is how I think, for the most part, the notes will go going forward, but we'll see. We'll see how this works. Just a couple reminders. Friday, you will still have your vocab due by 11:59. Saturday, you will still have your outline due by 11:59. And then your test, as always, will open up at 4 o'clock on Friday and will be due by 11:59 on Sunday. If you have not taken the Unit 6 test yet, please do so. And obviously, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, inquiries, whatever, send them to my email. And hopefully, like I told you in class, communication is key. And hopefully we can stay in contact, especially if there are any questions. Make sure to be looking out for the section notifications tab on the McGraw-Hill website for any other updates that I might have. And also, remember to do your daily attendance every single day, as I will post a question like I did. And everything will be posted under that e-learning folder. So make sure you are not confused about that. It will be always under the e-learning folder. We will have chapter 34 going forward. Same thing, vocab, outline, and assessment. We'll see. I might throw in a primary source there earlier in the week and give you anywhere from 2 to 3 days to complete that. But again, any questions, comments, concerns, since this is kind of a new uncharted territory that we're all going in, please feel free to email me if you have any issues or anything like that. All right, so let's get started. Chapter 33, The Great War in the World in Upheaval. So let's start with the immediate origins of World War I. June 28th, 1914, we get the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo, Bosnia-Herzegovina. And this place will be occupied by the Austro-Hungarian Empire since 1878, but will finally be annexed in 1908. Now, Ferdinand will be in favor of some type of greater Serbian autonomy. The problem is that will suffice for the majority of the population, that at least that's in the ear or getting on the talking points of the elites in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The problem is, for a lot of nationalist groups, especially extremists, this is not enough for these Serbian extremists in general. So the problem that they are going to have is, how do you make sure that everybody is happy in this? And there are going to be extreme groups that will resort to violence that we will see, as the Black Hand is what they will be known as. That Princip will be a part of, the assassin, as that will take these more violent approaches to make sure that their nationalistic ideas get come to fruition. And we know that some extreme groups will have to go to violence to get their point across, because unfortunately, sometimes in world history, violence is what usually wakes people up. But obviously, you can also undermine the point and message that you are trying to get across. So the immediate origin is just the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and this will be what kind of immediately starts the first domino that we will see in World War I. Now, this painting in 1914 of the assassination of the Archduke with his wife, the Duchess Sophie, will show that the gun that we see in Princip's hand as his revolver, and this two bullets, I should say, is what's going to trigger, no pun intended, the actual World War I that we all know today as the war to end all wars, or the Great War, and won't become World War I until World War II happens. Now, let's talk about Gavrilo Princip here for a second. He's going to be a Bosnian Serb, and he will be one of 7 assassins, and they are going to put these assassins in place for obvious reasons. If you have 7 assassins set up, the hope is that at least one of them will be successful, you would think. But the first one is kind of going to be too afraid to do anything. He's going to be stuck in the moment. He's going to balk the first attempt. Now, the second one's going to have a little more resolve. He is going to throw a bomb, try to get it in the car. It's going to glance off of the Archduke's shoulder and end up going into a crowd, blowing up and injuring a decent amount of people, passerbys basically. And this is going to be a key point, because this is going to allow Princip to have the moment to assassinate him. What's going to happen is those people are going to go to a hospital. After the Archduke is done going through his his parade, he is going to turn back and he is going to go to that hospital that all of those people got injured in. Now, once he goes to that hospital, this is where the assassin Princep is going to have his moment. He is going to lunge out at the Archduke's car and he will fire his revolver, and his first bullet will make its mark and it will hit the Archduke in the side of his neck and kill him moments later after that. Now, the second bullet was intended for the governor of Bosnia, but it went a little wild and it actually went into the stomach of the Duchess Sophie, and it will kill their child as she was expectant, and it will kill both of them. Now, just like any assassin that we've seen before, not seen before, but we will see going forward, is the idea of killing yourself before you are captured. So he's going to try to swallow an ineffective cyanide pill. The problem is it's not going to work. Okay, so he will be captured by a mob. He will be tortured. He will be put to trial, but he is too young to be executed. Imagine that. But he will be sentenced to 20 years in prison and will die of TB or tuberculosis. And this one bullet is what we're going to see start this catalyst of World War I. So let's talk about the outcome of Princep's bullet. This is going to be the first conflict of global proportions as we start to see a lot of continents come into play that we've never seen before, but also the imperialism will come into play. The industrial output that we've mentioned earlier in class is going to come into play. So we're going to see death on a scale that we haven't seen before, and especially with the firearms and military capacities that are being used. We'll never see anything like this before in war. And especially because, most regional conflicts have been that. They've been regional and maybe a little bit wider, but for the most part, not all encompassing and not the death toll that we see. So we'll just throw out some conservative estimates of death of 15 million dead, 5 million non-combatant civilians, and then 20 million injured. That's a pretty decent amount. We're talking about, about 40 million people in total encompassed in all that. Now, what we will see too is the changing of the landscape of the map as well. We'll see the end of 4 empires. So we'll see the end of the Ottoman Empire, the Russian Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the German Empire. Now, the Great War is going to also produce 9 new nations. We see Yugoslavia, Austria, Hungary. Notice that breakup. Czechoslovakia, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and Finland. And most of these are in Eastern Europe, if you kind of know your geography and can picture the map. So what we'll also see is massive global economic dislocations. We're going to see the rise of the United States kind of come onto the world power and the world scene economically, but also militarily. Great Britain is going to fall a little bit and get notched down a little bit. The French will get notched down a little bit. And because of the disasters of their economy, but also too social as well, we'll see Germany get broke down. And then those empires that we will see also that will have a breakdown as well. So we'll see the end of Europe's domination overall of the globe as United States, Japan, and these other groups kind of fill those voids. Now, we also see larger causes of World War I, this culmination of competing nationalisms that we see as these nationalistic ideas start to come to fruition. And we see this especially in Southern and Eastern Europe as the idea of throwing off the old yoke of empire, especially as the Ottoman Empire is contracting like we talked about. We are speaking of nationalism, and especially as other countries like Russia is stoking these flames of nationalism to kind of throw off Austro-Hungarian Empire, Ottoman Empire, and kind of set the stone, or cast a stone as far as making them a little bit wobbly in these parts where they want to see annexation, but also an idea that they can come in and take the place of those other empires. Now, we will see rivalries among other empires, especially when we talk about Britain and Germany, the French and Germany as well. And so we'll see a lot of these empires start to have economic rivalries, military rivalries, and imperialistic rivalries as well that we've kind of seen throughout the maps, especially when we talked about the scramble for Africa. And it's the idea of if you don't get something first, then the other person has it, or if you don't have it, then somebody else can get it instead of you. And so this idea of nationalism too, of we have to be the best. We are the best. This superiority complex will come into play as well. But it's, in the biggest problem, and especially that sets World War I into motion, especially, is the how powerful these countries are economically, militarily as well, with industrialization. So this is also set in that rivalry as well. We talked about Carthage and the Romans before, controlling the Mediterranean. This is going to play into Britain and Germany as well, as they look for control of the North Sea militarily, economically, the Mediterranean, the Suez Canal that we've talked about being of utmost importance to the British because of their imperial policies in India. So this is going to play a huge role going forward, especially between these two countries. But this will also lend itself to the inflexible diplomatic alliances between the two hostile camps that we'll talk about, with the Triple Entente and then the Triple Alliance with Germany, France, England, and Russia, just to name some of the countries not in both camps that will become hostile and have these inflexible alliances that basically say if it's attack on one, it's attack on all, and we have to resort to these economic military alliances. So it's kind of being set up to happen no matter what goes down. It's basically a powder keg that is ready to explode at any point in time. Now, let's look at nationalist aspirations. This inevitable outcome of the French Revolution that we will see from the aspirations of nations in general, as the French are reorganizing everything after the revolution, trying to get back on track, and especially after Napoleon, but also with a lot of these nationalist aspirations too, just self-determination and independence movements that we see with Italy in 1861, Belgium in 1830, and obviously Germany in 1871. So we get this inherent nationalism of the idea of these people with the same ethnic origins, language, and political ideas that will have the right to form these sovereign states. And this is what we'll come to know as this self-determination, that if you do have the same political ideas, ethnic origins, and language, that should have some type of idea of self-determination. Some people are going through this still today. I think of the northern Iraq with the Kurds and their kind of self-determination of sovereignty that's still kind of going on today. So self-determination will lead into these independence movements that some will be successful with Germany, Italy, Belgium, but also going forward with the Balkan states that have a lot of ethnic origins, culture, and policies as well, that people are trying to kind of undermine that and keep the status quo, where this is where we get the violence of Princip and other nationalist extremist groups that will use violence to get their message across. Now, when we look at nationalism in multinational empires, the problem is just that. One is, of course, they're going to feel like they can throw off the yoke of the old empire, especially because you don't have the same culture, language, and policies that will be set forth that keep people undermined. So with the Austro-Hungarian Empire with the Southern Slavs, the Russian empires with the Poles, Ukrainians, and Baltic states, and then the Ottoman Empire with the Greeks, Serbians, Romanians, and Bulgarians, we talked about how the Russians, only 50% of the land that they covered in their empire only spoke, or 50% only spoke Russian, and the others was different languages. And so it's hard to rule over places like this, especially when you have multinational empires. And this has kind of been an ongoing problem since very early ancient history, when we talk about the first empires, that they might succumb to rule early on, but going forward, not so much, especially when you want to have your own sovereign state, and especially because nationalism has been being trumped up in the late 1800s and early 1900s, as we get the superiority and the idea that they are, as one group is better than everybody else. But why can't we have this? In speaking of nationalistic identities, and so nationalism will play a huge role in the undermining of a lot of these groups, especially the empires, in trying to get their independence. Now, when we look at national rivalries, dominance of the British Empire will start to decline. You can see in 1870, 32% of the world industrial output will be from the British, which is crazy. amount, especially for that time. Now, what we will see, notice the date. This is 1870. This is 1870, just before we see the unification of Germany. Now, Germany by this time in 1914 will be at 13%. Now, notice what the British dropped down to, 14% by 1914. So we're going to see a lot of this national rivalry start to really come into play economically, which is what this is pointing out, but also too militarily, that we'll get to later with the Navy buildups. Now, we also see imperial competition. Germany being the latecomer, wanting their time to shine in this moment of imperialism, will also have this, but be an aggressive and an aggressive state that has come very, very quickly as kind of small and then ballooned up into this. But we will see small scale disputes around the globe, and especially in the Balkans, as we talked about, the Russians are kind of stirring the pot. But also, of course, with all this imperialism, these countries, and some of these empires are, of course, going to come into conflict with one another in small scale. We kind of alluded to last couple of weeks with the British and the Russians over India, as the Russians are starting to come a little bit more south. The British, as you go east into Burma and then skipping Siam as a buffer state, and then French Indochina as these are coming into conflict, but also Germany in Africa after the scramble of Africa, and Morocco comes to mind as the French are trying to keep it. Germany's trying to annex it because they have their own little plan that they want to get instilled for their own imperialistic policies. And so we start to get these small conflicts around the globe because of the outreach of these imperial powers and the industrialization and just the economic stretch that they have. Because once you start going, it's like Rome. You got to keep eating up other resources in places so that you can keep this huge machine you've created going. Now, move over to the naval race. This is kind of what I alluded to earlier. We get this arms race between the United Kingdom and Germany to try to control the North Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, and a lot of these other areas around Europe and in Africa, as well, as we try to keep open, especially for the British, the Suez Canal with their tie to India. So control militarily and economically, as there's a lot of tension going on between these countries, and just in general on the continent. They know something is coming at some point. It's just a matter of when and not if. So we see decisive control of these trade routes just in case of war, because you got to keep supply lines open. You got to keep the availability of troops in regions open. And so because of this, what we get is a new class of naval power, which will be these battleships that will become known as the dreadnoughts. And these will be an entirely new generation of warships characterized by their high speed, supplied by these steam turbines. And rather than discouraging the Germans from this naval buildup, the British will actually have this determination to retain naval superiority that will actually stimulate the Germans to building their own flotilla. So what you thought would hopefully deter them to do this will actually not. It will actually kind of give them even more this idea of building up even more, because like we talked about earlier with military buildup, you don't want to be the one without the newest, biggest, greatest thing. So you have to keep building up with that. So we see this expensive naval race that will contribute further to international tensions, and then obviously hostilities between these nations going forward. Now, let's look at something that we don't really talk about and has kind of really come to light, especially now with the advent of all this information coming about. Public opinion. This is kind of the first start that we get to where the media coverage really starts to ramp up, and especially with war and imperialism and nationalism. So we'll have the beginning of the media age start with this. And especially because we have the availability of just cheap pamphlets, cheap newspapers, and things being printed cheaply, and a lot more people being able to get their hands on them. And with literacy rates going up, we can see why this would be an avenue for information. But the problem is little accountability. People are kind of publishing whatever they want, and rumors and paranoia, and it's like tabloids today. It just kind of throws out all this misinformation. But we also see a little bit of an awkward pressure on politicians. These politicians are going to be compelled to try to achieve headline-grabbing foreign policy successes. And these leaders are really just running the risk of paying for short-lived triumphs with long-lasting hostility from other countries. So they're sacrificing this diplomatic expediency for public support. And this is going to really fan the flames of nationalism, but also this superiority complex that we've talked about. So public opinion will play into this as well. And that will set World War I off at a little bit different than we've seen anywhere else. Now, when we look at understandings and alliances, the agreements of this mutual defense, again, attack on one is an attack on all, and this chain reaction that we see to global war, because once that bullet hits, the Archduke is with Austria-Hungary, we're going to talk about most likely tomorrow with this chain of events that's going to set this thing in motion, and this chain reaction to what we get with this global war. Now, the two camps that we will talk about, these hostile camps, will be the Triple Alliance, which will consist of Germany and the Austro-Hungarians, with them creating this alliance that will be this dual alliance in 1879, where the governments of both of these empires will have this defensive pact that will ensure this reciprocal protection from maybe a Russian attack, but also neutrality in case of an attack from any other power. And for the fear of a hostile France, this is going to motivate the Germans to enter into this pact, where the Austro-Hungarians are viewing it as giving them a free hand in pursuing their Balkan politics and policies without fear of the Russian interventions that we've talked about. Now, Italy, being fearful of France, is going to join this dual alliance in 1882, and then this will be transformed into what we know today as the Triple Alliance. So from the outset, we see the Italian policy and the expense of the Ottoman Empire that will try to that will actually threaten and kind of weaken this alliance, because the Austro-Hungarians and the Germans kind of want a little bit of help from the Ottomans, but we will see the Italians declare war on the Ottoman Empire in 1911, and this will drive the annex of Tripoli, this region that we've mentioned a little bit in northern Africa, and will cause a little bit of a strain in the Triple Alliance, because, again, this government in Germany and Austro-Hungarians kind of wanted to have a friendly relationship with the Turks and Ottomans with their location on the globe. Now, the Triple Entente with the Russians, the French, and in the United Kingdom, you can see why they would go this way with what we've just talked about with the Austro-Hungarians, with the Russian intervention, in Germany afraid of the French. And of course, that's going to be reciprocated, and also the Italians too. So the British are coming on like, man, the Germans are really posturing here. We got to make sure that's something that we create something that is the same power, industrial, militarily, as what has just been set forward. And it's just like anything else we've talked about. You want to make sure that you are able to protect yourself, and you don't want to be left alone, and then this Triple Alliance comes through and wipes out everything and upsets the balance in Europe. So let's kind of end this off with the concerns of both camps. So let's start with the concerns of the Allies. The Central Powers are going to seek to protect the political status quo in Europe, but the leaders of other nations will view this as just this consolation of power and be suspicious over this. Okay, so of course they're going to be suspicious because of the powers at play, and so we'll see that the French government is going to really be determined to try to curb the growth of the German power at this time. Now, Russia is going to be equally disturbed of this new alignment of power, but especially Germany's support of Austria and the British leaders that have been traditionally suspicious of any nation that threatens this balance of power on the continent. And so that's kind of the result of what we get. But we see cultural similarities of the Germans and Austro-Hungarians that will play into this as well, and kind of make it an even more easy fit. Worries over Germany's two-front war with the French and the British in the West and Russia in the East. And the Schlieffen Plan that we'll talk about tomorrow, or start off with tomorrow, we'll talk about how this plan will come to fruition. Basically, to make a long story short, knock France out first because there's the closest in proximity. Russia's still trying to gain their mobilization, and you prepare for Russia, and that way you hopefully avoid a two-front war. Now, the British will come into play with this, but the hope is that with the Austro-Hungarians and Italians, you can kind of take a little bit of worry off your plate. But same thing, we get worries over the English domination of the sea. We see worries over possibility of a French attack, Russian interference, like we've said with the Austrian Balkan policy. So there's a lot of paranoia and concerns going on in rumors, and that's what's really driving all of this. Now let's go to the concerns of the Entente. kind of reciprocated from what we just said. Russia's worried about a strong German Austro-Hungarian alliance because of what they're trying to get accomplished. We see the United Kingdom concerned with maintaining, like we said, the balance of power. The French are worried about hostilities with Germany. And so, again, all this paranoia and all this, if this happens, he say, she say, and the public opinion and everything else is kind of building up these government heads of, you should go to war, you should be doing this, you should take a preemptive strike. And so cooler heads do prevail, but ultimately once Princeps bullet makes its mark, this is, again, the domino that starts to spill over in World War I. It just happened so quick. Nobody could believe that this was going to happen as fast as it did. And so what we will see is, we'll see the Triple Entente originate in this series of agreements between the British and French in 1904, and then between the British and Russia in 1907, and try to aim to resolve some colonial disputes. And between 1907 and 1914, we will see cooperation between the leaders of the British, French, and Russians that will lead to the signing of a military pact in the summer of 1914. We'll see reciprocal treaty obligations, which governments will feel compelled to honor if they face a risk of being alone in this hostile world that we've basically created, but also make it difficult for diplomats to contain what might otherwise just be somewhat of a relatively small international crisis that ends up ballooning into what we know as the Great War, the war to end all wars, or what will become World War I. And so you can see from this first section the buildup of World War I, the assassination of the Archduke, and then going back and seeing how this even got to this point of paranoia, that gets to this point of backing and alliances, and imperialism goes into this, industrial capacity goes into this, societies with public opinion will go into this, and it's kind of this perfect storm of this new society we built off of industrialization that will build up into this domino effect of World War I. All right, and that will do it for today. I'll leave you with that. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day until tomorrow on Thursday, where we'll pick up with part 2.